everyone, and welcome to another episode of Faye and Tom's Divorce Coaching Podcast. We are actually a podcast now as well, not just on YouTube, so you can find us on all Spotify's, Apple Podcasts, etc. We have a very interesting and very exciting guest again today. My LinkedIn, Instagram, Clubhouse, and all forms of social media friend, and one of my online besties, shall we say, lovely Natalie Sutherland, partner at Burgess Mee Family Law firm. Would you like to say hello and introduce yourself, Natalie?
Hi everyone, I'm Natalie Sutherland, partner at Burgess Mee Family Law specialist solicitor, and I have an extra special specialism in surrogacy law, which we're going to talk about today.
So excited, Natalie, to have you here. We were just talking about, weren't we, how it's great that me and Tom can have all these wonderful guests on, and I've got to say that surrogacy is something, again, that I am not familiar with at all. And I think it's really good that we can talk about it, because obviously you hear about it more, it's becoming more popular. So, you know, in a nutshell, Natalie, what do you do?
Well, you're right about it being interesting, because whenever I tell people this is what I do, they always want to know about that and not about the divorce and the financial arrangements that I also do. It is a very interesting area of law. So surrogacy is where you commission a surrogate to carry a child for you, and with the intention that that surrogate will give that child up for you and your partner, if you have one, to raise. And there is a specific law surrounding that, because of course the surrogate is the legal mother. So you have to transfer that legal parenthood to the intended parents, who, but for their intention to have that child, would not exist. So there is a special law surrounding that deals with babies born through surrogacy.
This must be a seriously scary situation for anyone to go through and even consider. Right? So what you mentioned about, obviously, like the surrogate mother has that legal obligation that they need to effectively give up those parental rights, it sounds like to me. So I suppose big question, what are the risks that are involved? I mean, where can it go wrong? I imagine in quite a lot of areas, potentially.
You've started at the most difficult aspect. So when surrogacy goes wrong.
Sorry, an easier one. I've already asked you what your name is.
So surrogacy usually doesn't go wrong. It is built on trust, and there are procedures in place where you get to know your surrogate, and you choose that surrogate based on the just certain criteria that you want to be on the same page of. So once you've chosen that surrogate, the intention, of course, is that they give up that child. And but the law also is about consent. So the surrogate has to agree to give up that child for you. And most surrogates who go into surrogacy absolutely have that intention, no doubt about it. They want to do it for you. They have a calling, essentially, to be able to help people that can't have children themselves, because infertility, or even not being able to have a child because you're in a same-sex relationship and you need help, can be devastating when you can't do it naturally. So surrogates who've had their own children, who can get pregnant easily, want to help. But when they give that child up, there's a lot of things in the press that will say, oh, well, you're selling your child, or you're giving up your baby. And it's not like that for the surrogate. She will always she goes into it knowing that she's basically doing extreme babysitting. So she's just looking after your child with the absolute intention to give that child over to you, and then you go through the legal process. So the handing over of the child isn't what gives up their parental rights. The intended parents have to go through a court process, which is the parental order. So they have to apply for that, and then they have a few hearings. The court will look into it and then decide whether or not to grant that parental order. And when they grant it, that is when the legal parenthood for the surrogate and her spouse, if she's married, then it gets extinguished completely forever and moved over to the intended parents forever. So very similar to an adoption order, in that it gets rid of the original rights of the original birth parents and moves it over to the intended or adopted parents. But surrogacy and adoption law is not quite the same, of course, because with the surrogate child, as I said earlier, they would not be in the world but for the intentions of that intended parents to create that child. Whereas adoption, you have birth parents that will have their own children and for whatever reason can't look after it themselves. So they find another family who will look after that child. So, but yeah, so if it does go wrong and a surrogate decides not to hand over that child, then the intended parents will have to think creatively, essentially. So at the moment, the court can't override that surrogate's consent. So if they don't consent to the parental order cannot happen. So the intended parents in that situation will not have a birth certificate with their names on, as you would do normally in a parental order situation. But if the child is with them, for example, the child's been handed over, but the surrogate may have changed her mind and decided that she doesn't want to give up her rights and perhaps maybe wants the child back, then you are definitely in court territory where the court then has to look at what's in the best interest of the child as to whom that child lives with. So lots of things can go wrong, and that's when you do need lawyers. But most surrogacy arrangements where the research has been done and the surrogates and the intended parents spend a lot of time with each other, they know each other, those ones will go through fairly seamlessly, and you don't hear about them because they go well. So it's only the ones where it causes issues that you tend to hear about.
Yeah, that's really good to know. It does sound really, really complicated when you start talking about the laws and what law protects which person. And I'm thinking about, surrogacy, I've heard it that people who are surrogates have this innate need to help other people. So it's kind of like a calling. And with you just saying, the surrogate and the intended parents spend time together, I want you to ask you a little bit about that process. How important is it to get a surrogate that is kind of on the same page as you, and how much time would prospective parents spend with a surrogate choosing which one is going to be right for them?
It's really important, but it also depends on where you start your surrogacy journey, so where your surrogate is going to be based. So if it's a UK surrogacy arrangement, then you're more likely, aren't you, to spend time together because you're in the same country, and you will be able to go for scans and really be involved. I know COVID has obviously affected your ability, intended parents' ability to be involved in that process, but still they're able to spend more time together. But if you choose say a US or Canadian journey, ultimately you're not going to be able to spend that much time together, but also it's a different process. So for example, in America, where there's commercial surrogacy, you don't necessarily have to meet and get on with your surrogate because it's a commercial process. You are paying for services, whereas in the UK, sorry?
It's transactional.
It's transactional, exactly. There's a contract. And here, whereas when I said before that the surrogate has to consent and could change her mind, in somewhere like the US, they can't. So the intended parents are the legal parents from birth, potentially even before birth if it's a pre-birth state, and the surrogate is not able to change her mind. So there might be some intended parents that go, do you know what? That I'm just more comfortable with that process. I'm more comfortable going to a jurisdiction where I know exactly what my rights are. I know I'm paying for the transaction. I've got lawyers over there that's going to draw up a contract that I'm going to be comfortable with. And again, and that's where you have those conversations before you choose a surrogate as to the matching. So to choose a surrogate, you have to be talking about things like, I don't know, how they're going to behave during the pregnancy. Are they going to stop smoking if they smoke? I mean, they wouldn't smoke, but being healthy. So what are their thoughts on abortion or selected reduction? So if there's twins, do you want to reduce to a singleton, or if there's triplets? So having those conversations early, you need to know that the surrogate you choose has your same values that will make those decisions the way you would want them to, because you're entrusting your child to a stranger essentially who's going to be looking after that child for you. And especially if you're in another country, you've got no control over what they do, and you're so far away. So having that transactional basis where you're more in control, there are some intended parents that will prefer that. And of course it comes at a cost. So it is more expensive to use a jurisdiction like the US. here, then you can be matched with surrogates either independently, so you can meet them on things like Facebook groups.
So where do you find a surrogate? Is it like Tinder, or like how do you find the right person?
You can join a UK-based surrogacy agency, and there's a few of them now, and so there's a brand new one, I'm sure you've heard of it, My Surrogacy Journey. So that is newly set up by Mike and Wes Johnson Ellis, and it is a fantastic new type of surrogacy agency. They have lots of member benefits and lots of suppliers, and of course lawyers are, you know, classed as the suppliers. And then you have other ones that are much longer established. So you have COTS or Surrogacy UK or Brilliant Beginnings. So these are not-for-profit surrogacy agencies in the UK that will take intended parents as their members and also surrogates. And then there's a matching process. So again, you look to see which type of person you feel is more aligned with how you come to surrogacy for. But there's also, I mean, I know there's some surrogacy agencies that will do like meetups, so like social meetups. And that's, you know, it's a great way to get to know people, but it's also not for everyone, because well, whilst you'll have gay couples, for example, who, you know from the beginning that they will need an egg donor and a surrogate to be able to get pregnant. So they go into the surrogacy process, you know, completely fresh and with no past trauma. That's exactly what they need to do to have children. But you could have a heterosexual couple that have struggled for years and have had multiple miscarriages, and you know, and then need a donor egg. So you've got the woman who is then grieving the loss of that biological connection, now having to find not only an egg donor but also a surrogate if they can't carry. So they come to it with this past trauma. So it is slightly different when you are you know, the different type of couple, really.
I was going to go then, but Faye looked like she was going to ask something.
No, not at all. I'm sitting back from you. You can take
Cool.
the floor.
Touch on something there that I'd already made a note of beforehand that I wanted to ask around. So when it comes to surrogacy, and I did a little bit of reading, but that's why you're here, to tell everybody else. Where's the guidelines around using the intended mother's egg, if that's possible? Because it might be that, I imagine there are situations where you could use the intended mother's egg,
Yep.
but maybe she can't carry, and that's where you find a surrogate as well.
Mm-hmm.
Or does the surrogate ever use their own egg, or is it always in artificial insemination?
So both. So there's two different types of surrogacy. You have your traditional surrogacy, where the surrogate does use their own egg. So that is where the intended father, or perhaps you know, if there's two gay men, they might mix their sperm, and then it's artificially inseminated into the surrogate, and then they hope that she becomes pregnant using her egg. So obviously you do that during her cycle, and then perhaps you wait and see who might be the biological father, or if it's, you know, a male and female couple, it will be that man's child. But with the women, so for example, if there's cancer, that's a cancer diagnosis, and they have frozen their eggs to preserve fertility, and then later on are able to use their own egg with the sperm of their husband or partner to create an embryo that is then transferred into the surrogate. So that is gestational surrogacy. So that is where the surrogate is just the host, essentially. She's just growing the child that is the biological child of the intended mother and the intended father. Or in the traditional surrogacy, she is gestating a child where she is the biological mother and the intended father is the biological father. So yeah, there's different ways of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to me, and you know, I'm sitting here thinking, you know, there's a lot of trust that's got to be given to the process, a lot of trust that's got to be given to all the people involved, and I want to ask you, it's got to be really stressful as well for everyone involved. And you know, how do couples that are using surrogacy, how do they cope with that stress? Do you find that some couples break up before even the baby's born because of the stress that they're under, and how do you work with those people to navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, it is stressful, and they call it a journey, and that's for a very good reason, because from the moment you start thinking about how to create your family and surrogacy being the option from that moment to when you have your child in your hands, and then thereafter the legal order that makes that child your legal child. You know, it can be anything from, I don't know, 18 months to 2 years. So it's a long process, and there are lots of things, of course, that can go wrong along the way. You know, not only could you match with a surrogate and then miscarry, and you have to find another surrogate. And as you say, you could split up. And there are certain legal actual ramifications from that. So, for example, if the couple split up after the baby is conceived, but before the baby's born, or even before you've applied for the parental order, what do you do? Because the law says that you have to be in an enduring family relationship where the child has a home with both parties if you're applying together. And the law has specifically looked at situations where couples have split up, and therefore, you know, the child has its home with one parent but not the other parent. So how does that actually work out? Well, the judges, a colleague of mine has used the term judicial acrobats, which I really like, because they do have to jump through a lot of hoops to make the law work for children born through surrogacy. Because of course it's not their fault that they're born through surrogacy, and that there's lots of moving parts. And the granting of a parental order is so important because it gives that transformative effect, and it's lifelong. So the courts want to, as much as they can, grant that parental order. So, for example, if couples have split up, but they want to apply together, then they'll have a wide interpretation of home that says that the child has their home with both parents, albeit in different properties. So, and these are things that might not have been contemplated previously. So again, if a parent dies and they can't, you then don't apply together. There's been a case recently where the deceased father, so the mother, applied on his behalf, and they read down the legislation. And what that means is they read it through the view of the Human Rights Act, because the child's right to family life is engaged. So they want that child to be able to have its deceased father on a birth certificate, just like any other child would. So it's great the way that the courts are able to interpret the HFEA legislation to enable babies to be protected by the parental order. But what they're not able to do right now, which is quite frustrating in one of my cases, is they cannot veto the surrogate mother's lack of consent. So if the surrogate mother decides that she doesn't want to agree to the parental order, there is absolutely nothing that the judges can do in reading down or any kind of thing like that to veto it, whereas they can in adoption. So, you know, there's an anomaly there. And the Law Commission, who is looking at reforming surrogacy law, is looking at whether or not the court should have that veto. And I very much think that they should. I think it should be given to the courts to look at what's in the best lifelong interests of the child as to whether or not there be a parental order in the case where the surrogate doesn't consent.
Is that a common situation? Does it happen?
Again, it's one of those things where it's a surrogacy gone wrong, and the courts do, you know, have to look at creative ways. And I've had this in one of my cases, and it's a really sad situation where my two clients, the two gay dads, you know, they won't get their birth certificate with their names on it because the surrogate will not consent, but the child is with them. So the child was handed over to them. They have looked after that child since birth. And what we were able to do creatively is to apply for a child arrangements order that says that the child lives with them and doesn't live with the surrogate and her husband and family. But the legal parenthood is still with the surrogate and her husband, and not with my clients. But we were able to limit their ability to use their parental responsibility, and the child arrangements order gives my clients parental responsibility. So it's the best we can do in that situation, which is not ideal, because this child, when they have to give their birth certificate, for example, when registering at school, it's going to have two random people's names on it. Yeah. And of course, you know, that they are going to know that they have come from a surrogacy arrangement. And that's actually more obvious when it's a gay couple, because, you know, the child is going to realise growing up that, you know, there's no mum there, and they're going to have questions. And so we find that that same-sex couples are able to have that story really early, whereas with heterosexual couples, perhaps they may not have that conversation early about where the child comes from.
I mean, with you just talking that phrase surrogacy gone wrong, I imagine that happening is quite low, that in the grand scheme of wanting help, that percentage is really low. And I also wanted to ask about, you know, when the child does turn 18, do many of them have the right then to find out about their surrogate parent, or how does that work?
Well, the birth certificate that they have doesn't refer to it as being a surrogate journey, a surrogate birth. But like I say, with same-sex couples, they're going to know. And in this country as well, there's no absolute anonymity on donors anymore. So so the law changed 2015, and so any children that have donors as part of their sort of makeup will be able to get non-identifying information at 16 and identifying information at 18. So, but the what the courts want to know, and when the parental order reporter comes into your home and looks at, you know, make sure that the children are looked after as part of that parental order process, they will ask you as the intended parents what your intention is with telling this child about their identity. And there is a lot of research that's been done that says telling your child early on and often where they come from and where their genetic makeup is and how they came to be born is much more in their best interests than hiding it and pretending like you carried that child, because they'll find out later on, and then it'll have a detrimental impact on their well-being. We know this from donor conceived people, where so there's not a surrogate involved as such, where the mother, so the mum and dad in that family have had a child and raised the child as their own, but where donor gametes have been used either for the mother or the father, and they don't say anything about it. And years ago, when I'm sorry, I know we're coming on to donor conception, but years ago when people were using donor conception to conceive, it was not the done thing. They were told specifically not to tell their children, just pretend it never happened. And but then because you're having DNA tests, you know, that they're so prevalent now, people can go and get DNA tests, you know, on the internet, Ancestry, 23andMe, and find out randomly that their dad's not their dad, or they've got 20 half siblings because their mum used a donor sperm. So so research has been done that says telling your child the truth early on is much better for them.
I was wondering about, I was kind of thinking around the adoption side as well, and that has a similar kind of process around bringing up, talking about those subjects earlier, normalize the experience for the child as they come up as well. Like you said, years gone by, it was actually specifically told, don't do that, like keep it quiet. And like say now everyone's doing 23andMe to find out what nationalities they've got in them, and then going, oh hold on a minute. So yeah, that must be really scary. One thing I suppose, obviously being the divorce coaching podcast, Faye and I usually tend to deal with, as I know you do, Natalie, people on the other end of the spectrum when it's not the conception side, but necessarily how they're going to separate and co-parent and where that child's going to be and live, etc. So one of the things that I wanted to ask selfishly as a dad was, if I had gone through in a heterosexual relationship, either donor conception or having a surrogate mother, if me and my partner had divorced and separated some years down the line, the kid's either 8, 25, whatever it is, do you still have do the same parental responsibilities from a legal perspective still transpire as they would do as if I was the biological father?
Yes, if you've had your parental order. So if you've had a child through surrogacy, and you, whether it's abroad and you come back here, or if it's UK, and you have your parental order, so obviously you've got to check all of the eligibility criteria, and obviously your surrogate's got to consent. You have your parental order, and then from the date of that parental order, you are the legal parents, as if you've given birth to that child yourself. So at that point, there is no need for either party to worry about their legal status with regard to that child should they later split up. So if you split up and you have a child through surrogacy, and say, for example, the mother is not the biological mother, let's say you've used donor egg and the intended father's sperm, so there's no biological connection to the intended mother, only to the father, but the parental order gives you equal legal parenthood status. No, the father is not more important than the mother just because his gametes were used. So that's why having that parental order is very important. And it also is very important for things like inheritance. So if you are the legal parents to your child, they're automatically able to inherit. But if you don't apply for that parental order, they are not your legal children. So if you had a will that says, I will leave my estate to my child, that would fail because that's not your legal child. And this is a ticking time bomb. These things could just completely go off years down the line, you hadn't realized. So and again, immigration, nationality, so having to get a British passport, have you been able to pass down your nationality to your surrogate born child? Well, if you have a parental order, then they're your legal children. But if you don't have a parental order, then the surrogate mother is still that child's legal mother. So there's lots of repercussions. And of course, if you don't have that the parental order and you split up years down the line, then you may have that sort of feeling, well, that's my biological child, it's not your biological child, so I'm more important. And that's issues down the line as well, because then you've got to look at how do you get parental responsibility, because you don't have it if you're not a biological parent, or the parental order is in there. So and we see it as well with same-sex female couples. So same-sex female couples who will have created a child through home insemination with, for example, the sperm of a gay friend. So they've decided that they're going to create a child together. So we're not using surrogacy because the female is carrying the child. So the female who gives birth, of course, is the legal mother, but that other woman in that relationship hasn't obviously contributed any gametes, because it's the other woman's egg and the man's sperm. But the difference here is we need to look at whether or not they're married at the time of conception and whether or not they've done it in a clinic. So if the female couple are married or in a civil partnership, at the time that they have the donor sperm, either through home insemination or through a clinic, they will be the legal parents, the two women. But if they are not married, then to be have a legal status, they will have to go through a clinic, and of course that's expensive. So some people choose not to do that. They choose to have donor insemination with a friend, a known donor, and but if they're not married themselves, then what's going to happen there is the donor is the legal father, and the woman who's bringing up this child, who's not the birth mother, has no legal status. So we have cases as well where they split up later down the line, but there's no legal status, and then you have to make this application for a child arrangements order to give you PR to have, to try and regularize that. But it will never be as good as what it should have been had you known about the legal implications of what you're doing to create that child.
I can see why you love and specialise in this area.
Yeah.
My brain's going a little bit like Rain Man, but equations and like binary code for how this could work. This one's here and that one's there. It must be really interesting, but also
it's fascinating.
A bit of a minefield potentially as well. All the multiple moving parts. Cool. What was it that actually brought you to specialise in this area then? What was it for you?
Well, it was being involved in my previous firm and sort of learning sort of on the job, so to speak. And because I've been doing family law, your divorce, your children arrangements, your financial remedy applications for years, and that was bread and butter stuff, and it's people fighting, it's people, it's really litigious. And then when I started doing this work, it was such a change to have this like really happy ending. So you're creating families rather than helping them break up, essentially, to live separately, and how they move on from a relationship breakdown. But creating families was just so fascinating to me. And and going to a final hearing where the parental order is granted, I found myself like proper welling up. I was like, oh my God, this is so lovely. And there was the judges taking photos with babies, and I'm like, oh my God, I want to get a photo. So I just loved it. Absolutely loved helping to create, obviously, this family. And for them to walk away, you know, two happy couples with a child that they're much loved, much wanted, and they've gone through so much to get there, and to be there right at the end where they can now, you know, go off and enjoy each other was a privilege, and I've really enjoyed doing it ever since.
It's amazing when you talk about maybe the process taking 18 months to 2 years, that, you know, when they get to what I call the finish line of actually having their baby in their arms, that must be such a surreal and proud, you know, a moment full of so much emotion. So I get that. I mean, I can't imagine how that feels. And I kind of want to ask you, when you're talking about, you know, same-sex couples and heterosexual couples, what are you seeing more of at the moment? What is there a trend? Are you seeing more same-sex couples now, or what's happening at the moment?
I think for surrogacy, it is it's just an accepted part of gay men having children. It's been around for 10-11 years now, and it is very much a part of gay men have been able to have children that want to have that biological connection. You know, there's adoption that's always available, but you know, people want to procreate themselves. Of course, everyone has a burning desire to have that biological connection, and when you're missing an element and there is this element available to you, should you be able to go through that process, then it's wonderful. So definitely same-sex male couples, it is standard for them to use it. Same-sex female couples obviously don't need to, because they either have the egg or the ability to carry one or both of them, and just need donor sperm. So that's where you find that they're able to go through fertility clinics and have been able to do this, or even not even fertility clinics. You know, friends are willing to donate and have home insemination. So same-sex female couples have been able to create families in that way much longer than same-sex male couples. But with heterosexual couples as well, this is a way of being able to have children if there are fertility issues where you've tried everything else. So especially when there's fertility preservation. So if as I said before, if a woman is going through cancer treatment, if she'll either need to preserve her fertility by having egg retrievals and freezing her eggs before going through chemo and things like that, and then hoping that when she finds someone later down the line when she's well, to be able to use those eggs herself to carry, but she might not be able to. So then you try and use a surrogate to do that. But perhaps, you know, if she hasn't been able to freeze her own eggs, then she may need a donor egg. So that's where you would have you'd go through a clinic to find someone who would donate their eggs to you, and then create that embryo in the lab, in the clinic, with the sperm of the intended father. And then if they're not able to carry themselves, then that's when you need a surrogate. So people come to it for all sorts of different reasons. So some, like as I said, some is just a natural way of creating families, or there is some tragedy that has preceded it, which is really sad.
Cool. You've answered loads. I'm surprised we squeezed so much into such a short time. Tell you what, then, so for anybody that's watched and or indeed listening to this now, what advice would you give to people that maybe at their earlier stages of maybe their discussions and their thoughts about it, whether they are same sex or heterosexual? What are kind of the key headline topics and takeaways that people should think about and discuss before contacting a surrogacy specialist solicitor like yourself, and embarking on that process and reaching out to the agencies that you mentioned?
Well, I actually do think the first thing to do is to speak to a family lawyer that specialises in surrogacy, because you have a long road to get your baby and get the parental order, but you need to know at the outset that you're eligible. So you need to have that initial meeting with a family lawyer that says, this is my family setup, this is my situation, because we need to know that you're domiciled in the UK. We need to know, you need to know that you can't do double donation. So there has to be at least genetic connection to one of you. And you might not know that. So you don't know what you don't know. So the best thing to do, I think, is to have an initial meeting with a family lawyer that specialises in surrogacy and fertility law to talk about your specific family setup. And then to know, and when you come out of that meeting, you'll know that surrogacy is a viable option for you. Then you need to know what jurisdiction you want to use. If you want to use the UK, then you need to know that it's going to be a long wait, because you need to find a surrogate, and you'll need to go through that whole matching service, either joining an agency or doing it independently. Getting to know you, that takes a long time, finding someone that you really align with. And surrogacy agreements, now they're not legally binding in the UK, but we want you to have them, but lawyers can't help you draft them because it's a criminal offence. So you need to so we don't get involved in that at all. So we can't help you draft up a surrogacy contract, but surrogates and intended parents should do that themselves, and the agencies that you're involved with can help with that. So that's when you talk about everything that you want out of the process, and your red lines, and what you wouldn't accept, so that you're all on the same page, so you know that this surrogate that you're going forward with is the right one for you. Also accept that there's going to be bumps in the road. We can't plan everything, so you need to sort of go into it with an open mind to say, right, well, this may not be, and is unlikely to be, a smooth journey. There's going to be bumps, and we just need to support each other through that to get through it, essentially. And then once you create your either your embryo, or you have your child, and then you have this beautiful bundle in your arms, you need to come back to the lawyers again, and so that we can help you with that parental order process. Don't put it off. You've got 6 months to make that application. Again, the court has looked at allowing couples to apply outside of that 6-month time limit, but there would have to be a very good reason, not because you didn't know about it. So that's something that you need to get on with. And of course, you've got a newborn in your arms. It's probably not the one thing you're thinking about, but certainly wrap up the legals as soon as you can.
Yeah. I mean, just hearing you talk, I can see how valuable your service is to people going through this process. And I suppose I'm fascinated to know, obviously being Tom, a divorce coaches to a certain extent, is there anything such as a surrogacy coach?
I was thinking,
are there any out there?
Oh my gosh, do you know? I don't think there are. I've not heard of that.
There should be.
Yeah, maybe Natalie, that's something else you could do.
And of course, the agencies help. The agencies are there to really guide you through the process, to let you to know where you need to go next. But certainly, having that sort of doula for the surrogacy as well as a doula for the birth is a very good idea.
Well, just go back a few questions actually. When you were talking about obviously UK or US or Canada, and you said obviously that's more transactional. I don't mean to be too transactional business about it, but how much does something like that cost?
So Canada, slightly different to the US because they have an altruistic system like what we do. So it's not commercial. You don't pay your surrogate in Canada for their services. You're paying them reasonable expenses, and they have, similar to our NHS. So there's a lot of similarities with our two systems, but still, because you're going abroad, you're still paying for an agency. You would really need an agency in Canada and the lawyers over there. Whereas if you did just a straight UK journey, you would just be with the UK lawyers. So going abroad is always going to be more expensive. But somewhere like so the US, it's upwards from $100,000, 150, 200 when you factor in everything. Whereas in the UK, you could be doing it for the surrogacy reasonable expenses, 18, 20 grand maybe, and then your parental order process. If you go to somewhere like Ukraine, it's an abroad journey, but it's not as expensive, but still you have that legal certainty because you are the legal parents when that child is born. The difference with somewhere like Ukraine is that the baby is not a Ukrainian citizen when they're born. So the intended parents have to stay in Ukraine for what, 4, 5, 6 months while they apply for the British passport for their child before they're allowed back into the country. Whereas you wouldn't need to factor that time and cost in to a journey in the US, because the child that's born through surrogacy in the US and Canada automatically have US or Canadian citizenship. So they would be entitled to those passports immediately, and you could probably get it in a few weeks, COVID depending. So and then you're able to fly in outside the rules on those passports, and then apply for your parental order here and get your British citizenship that way. So there's lots of things to factor in when you're thinking about the cost, because whilst you front load it in places like the US, you get to come home quicker. Yeah. Whereas someone like Ukraine, where that child is stateless until you are able to get them the British passport, and you've got to factor in living in a country that you may not know the language of, and what happens to work, and you've got a newborn. So and there's obviously benefits to staying in the UK, because you can work and you've got your family around you and you speak the language, and but it's going to be a longer process anyway trying to find a surrogate who is available, because there are more intended parents searching for surrogates than there are surrogates. So that's why it does take longer.
That's amazing. In fact, this week I was reading an article about a couple in the UK who had their surrogacy via abroad. I'm sure it was America. And even though the baby was born, because of COVID, they weren't able to go and see their baby. I don't know whether you've been reading the same article at all, Natalie. It must be absolutely, well, I can't even begin to imagine what those people are going through. And they're just waiting for the restrictions to lift so they can come and bring their baby home. And it's been over.
Yeah, with the US, when obviously the borders were closed, there is a, what's it called, like an exemption. So once you are the parents of a US born child, so you have to wait for the child to be born, there's an exemption that if it's in the US national interest, you're able, you get your lawyers over there to get you in. So you're able to come into the country to bring home your child, but you'll have missed the birth, which is really sad. But then the passport offices have also been closed, and that might take more weeks. You've got an ESTA, and that might run out. So you've got to think of your visa requirements. So it might be easier to lobby your MP or the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to get British travel documents, emergency travel documents, to get you back slightly easier. But there's also the in the Ukraine, so they closed their borders really quickly, and there was lots of Ukrainian babies born, and people couldn't get in to pick them up. And it's terrible. COVID has really impacted international surrogacy, and whereas we all knew it was international, the minute the borders are closed, you saw the impact that it had on everybody involved.
My mind's going crazy now thinking about these different places. I didn't want to get too into the detail, but again, that's why we do this, is to help people get some knowledge and some resources, isn't it? But so again, just being devil's advocate, if you're doing it, let's say in the States, knowing how the States operates per state, are there federal and also state-based laws that can also impact that?
Yeah,
so
I don't think there's
compared to different
states. So there's no federal law. It's very state by state. Okay. So when you're in the US, you have to choose a US lawyer who absolutely knows about this area, because there are different states that will have different benefits to you in terms of your setup. So there are certain states that might be more gay friendly than not, and your surrogates can move as well. So if your surrogate moves into a non-surrogacy friendly state, what happens then if that surrogate is, the child's born there? So whilst you will across the board normally be able to have your legal parenthood, you absolutely do need legal advice in that specific state where the surrogacy is going, the surrogate is, because that's the law that's going to apply to you. And it's different in Canada as well. Different provinces have different state laws as well. So.
Really interesting, really interesting. Cool. All right. Well, I think I've asked you everything that I can think of at the moment. I'm sure I'll come up with some others and I'll email you after. No, thanks very much for being here. I mean, if anybody that's watching or listening, how do people find you, Natalie, to come and talk to you and seek out your expert advice and support?
Yeah, I'd love to speak to anybody who is interested. So my email is nataliesutherland@burgessmee.com. If they're on Instagram, I'm at The Modern Family Lawyer. I'm on Twitter, Natalie_S_lawyer. And I'm on LinkedIn. Or you can find me on the Burgess Mee website as well.
Failing that, go through it, message me, because I've got 100 Natalie's contact details on platforms anyway, and I'll just send you a message. No, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and my mind's still boggling trying to think of all these different ways it works.
It's been fascinating. I love having people on like you, because I go away and I sit there and process it and think how wonderful it is that, you know, we are now in a society where people can do this, to have the family that they want and that they deserve.
Yeah, definitely. It's very important work, and it's wonderful because everybody needs to have a family. I think everybody wants, if they want to have a family, there should be ways of being able to create that family. So I'm glad to help in that regard.
Absolutely. Right. Thanks again for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure, and yeah, we'll be sharing this very shortly. And anyone has any other further questions or comments about today's video, please leave them somewhere in the comments box, wherever that is. And likewise, if you do want to get in touch with us, just reach out to one of us, and Faye and I will put you in touch with that. Thank you very much for joining your vast knowledge and experience today. It's been really, really interesting. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
See you later, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.